Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast presented by Bee Culture. Beekeeping Today podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
I'm Kim Flottam.
And I'm Kirsten Traynor.
Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
Hey, thanks for that, Sherry. We really appreciate our sponsor support. You know, without it, we would have a very difficult time bringing you the podcast on a weekly basis. With that, thanks to Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today. And while you're there, check out Bee Culture's Beekeeping, your first 3 years, a quarterly magazine for beginning beekeepers. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms as sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinator insects. Learn more on our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast with editor and our guest co-host Kirsten Traynor, and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with a number 2. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Kim. Hey, Kirsten. How you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yep, doing okay.
So what's going on? Kirsten, you're in Berlin still?
I am still in
How
Berlin.
How much longer?
I'm going to be here for, I'm getting an experiment up and running, and so I'm staying a little bit longer. I'm going to create a second version of this tracking system to bring back to the U.S. with me. And so I'm at the moment tagging bees that either emerge with varroa or without varroa, so I can follow and track their behavior as adult bees.
Now, I saw you posted on Instagram the pictures of the little tags that you're putting on. Is this related to the robot bee, too, that you're working on?
No, two separate projects. The robot bee, the dancing bee, that's part of the Hiveopolis project. That's an EU grant that I'm on to design the hive of the future. And the goal with that is to have a robo bee that actual in-hive bees will follow, and then you can direct them to a good food source and away from pesticides. So we shall see.
Interesting.
Yeah, the bees have a mind of their own, and the comb was twice as wide to house the robot, and so they did not like brooding on it because it was not warm enough for them.
Oh, wow. You posted the pictures on all the comb and how that was affecting things on Instagram. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's under my Bewitching Beekeeper Instagram. That's where I tend to post a lot of honeybee stuff. I keep the 2 Million Blossoms more generally pollinator oriented.
What about you, Kim? What are you up to?
I'm trying to get a bunch of things done before the snow flies here, and up until last week, of course, it was hot and dry, and then this week it's been cool and wet. So if it isn't one thing, it's another, and I'm still not getting anything done.
Well, we could take some of that cool and wet out west.
I'd be happy to share it with you, especially the wet. They need moisture out there. I can't believe how dry it is, talking to people from out there, how dry it is, and the fires. What a mess.
It is bad. In fact, we don't have any fires around us in Olympia, but the air is pretty smoky. In fact, I can feel it in my throat. I've closed all the windows in the house so that we're not dealing with the smoke, and it's and you might even be able to hear it in my voice. So it's I feel really bad for all the people who've lost houses and homes and properties and lives. It's a bad situation.
It's a mess, that's for sure.
Yeah, we've had a really bad year for fires. It just seems that in all parts of the Southwest and the West that places keep igniting.
Yeah, it's best of luck to any of our listeners who are in the areas of the burns, and hope that you survive through it with minimal loss. So, Kirsten, who are you talking to today?
Today I spoke with Bonnie Morse. She was recommended to me by Mark Winston. She organized the Bee Audacious conference a few years back, which was quite the event, after having read an article that Mark Winston had written about thinking big. And she has currently, fire is very pertinent. She's been working with the fire departments in California to rethink fire preventative maintenance so that you're not pulling all the things that are nectar and pollen sources for pollinators, and that you're making smarter decisions in how to protect your homes and what is allowable to be grown around properties.
I gotta believe that you're going to be banging heads if you got, one group says get rid of all the underbrush and the other group says no, we got to save it for the pollinators. It'll be interesting to see how they solve that, if they're able to solve that.
So yeah, they're working to make smart decisions so that certain things are not very fire prone, and you can't just say, oh, we need to get rid of all of these shrubs when they're an excellent nectar source. And so they're trying to educate and inform, and fire prevention has large budgets, so they can make very smart decisions that are well informed once they have the information.
It'll be interesting to see what they have to say.
All right. Well, before we get to the interview, I just want to let our listeners know if you haven't heard the last couple episodes, there's a really good a conference coming up in beginning of October. It's the 4th International Bee and Hive Monitoring Conference, October 5th through 9th. It'll be hosted on Zoom. There's over 40 presenters grouped into special topics, all regarding everything tech bees, including maps and apps and standalone programs, scales, sensors, RFID solutions, infrared imaging, hive monitoring for asset security and theft protection. It's everything connected to the bees and bee yards that you can do with a computer. Good opportunity to find out what's available and what's coming up.
Yeah, and Jeff, attendance is limited. You can get a lot of people on Zoom, but you can't get them all on Zoom. And registration is open, and I'm registered.
Fantastic. And how much was that?
It's only $20, and it's 4 days? I think parts of 4 days.
Yeah,
so
4 days.
It's only $20. Yeah. So if you're interested, and you do it with PayPal.
Yeah, get out there and get signed up right away. Hey, before we get to the interview, let's hear from Kirsten's sponsor, Better Bee.
Better Bee is pleased to present the interviews by Kirsten Traynor. As a supplier to our nation's beekeepers for over 40 years, Better Bee provides the tools, equipment, and information you need to succeed. Through its many beekeeping employees, Better Bee serves you with solutions to your beekeeping challenges. That's why they can say with confidence that they are your partners in better beekeeping. Thanks to Better Bee for their informative catalog, website, supportive beekeeper education, and for sponsoring the series featuring Kirsten. Be sure to see the latest at betterbee.com.
I'm guest host Kirsten Traynor, editor of 2 Million Blossoms, Protecting Our Pollinators. Today, I've invited Bonnie Morse, who organized the Bee Audacious conference in 2016. She and her husband Gary run Bonnie Bee and Company, educating other beekeepers and supplying sustainable and locally raised bees. Bonnie is now working hard to integrate pollinator-friendly plantings into fire prevention. She's in Marin County, California. Welcome to the show, Bonnie.
Thanks, Kirsten, and congratulations on the magazine. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. It's definitely a work of love. I pour way too many hours into it, but it's one of those things that I thought there was a big need for to embrace all pollinators. And so
absolutely,
that's the driving force.
It's outstanding. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. So how can you tell our listeners how you first got interested in honeybees?
Well, it started, we got our first hive in 2007, but that was a couple years after observing that our neighbor had hives. And we'd never really thought about beekeeping, even though, we were avid gardeners and we were constantly surrounded by bees. And it was really funny, actually, because our first thought was, is that even safe to have in a neighborhood? Because we live on a fairly busy street. And so after a couple of years of just kind of observing he and his daughter out there working their hives together and getting really vested in watching like the cycles of his colonies, we decided we wanted to get in on it. Because we had this amazing garden that his bees were constantly over collecting nectar and pollen from. And we thought we wanted to have some in our own yard.
So they were enjoying all the bounty, and you figured you'd bring in some colonies of your own to see up close and personal.
Yeah, exactly. And we made the mistake that a lot of beginner beekeepers do in thinking that, we got into spring and thinking it was early enough to get a hive because summer hadn't even started yet, and there were just no bees available. So we ended up getting a swarm from someone. And
okay.
and when he brought it, he said, "Hey, I had a swarm move into some other equipment at our house. Do you want a second hive?" And I said, "Well, we just got the first one. I think we'll hold off." And an hour later, I called him back and said, "Yeah, we want it." Yeah. So we got obsessive pretty quickly.
So yeah, I always try to get people to start with a minimum of 2, preferably 3, just because when you only have one, it's really hard to recognize what's going on in the colony, if it's doing well, or you have nothing to compare it to. It just looks like a chaotic jumble.
No, very true. And we do encourage people to get 2. I mean, because the learning curve is a lot faster. They can share resources. But, at the beginning, we were just thinking one was ample. But in that first hour, we were just mesmerized. We just sat there watching them, and when they started bringing pollen back. And so it just took off from there.
Well, that is a great way to get into it. And so you're north of San Francisco. Can you paint a picture of what keeping bees is like in that region?
It's very different. I mean, in just mile to mile here. During the summer, we're not a really big county. It's about 25 miles if you drive from the southern edge of the county, which is actually the Golden Gate Bridge, to the northern border. But in the summer, there can be a 30-degree difference between the north and the south. And then between that, there's a lot of different plant communities. So the southern part, you think like fog, moisture, redwood trees. Mill Valley is actually home to Muir Woods, and that's in the southern part. And then once you get into the north, it's like oak, dry, scrubland, so very, very different. And so the beekeeping is very different in all the areas. But we are a Mediterranean climate. So
interesting.
We have a pretty long summer dearth. I always say when our hills turn brown, which is usually beginning of June, the comb building is done for the season. We do have a pretty mild winter though, and with the non-native eucalyptus that grow here, particularly in the southern and middle parts of the county, our comb building starts in February. So our season is really February to May.
Oh, that's a really early season. That's very, very similar to Arizona, where our season sort of gets going in mid to late January, and then by early May, it's starting to get so hot that all the bees are focused on bringing in water.
Yeah. I always laugh, friends of mine in more northern climates where they get snow laugh when I talk about our winter. I always have to put it air quotes winter because it's so mild. But I say, our winter is hot and brown and yours is cold and white.
Yeah, so. This is very true. The summer dearths are really, really tough. I've experienced those in Maryland where after black locust, there just isn't much coming in. So as of about June 5th, the bees kind of go into a status where they're using up stores, but not really bringing in anything but pollen. So.
Yeah. Well, we have the same thing. Although we're lucky, our native coyote bush, Baccharis, will come on board. It's actually starting to bud up now. I saw first bud breaks in one area of Marin yesterday. And the bees can put on a lot of weight. It's a really important plant.
Interesting. I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, not just for our honeybees, but it supports about 400 native insects. So
wow, that's an incredible diversity. And is it very widespread? What kind of habitat is it growing in?
Well, like I said, we have all these different microclimates, but interestingly enough, it's kind of ubiquitous across these different areas in the county. It's a pretty, most people, even though it's native and it's everywhere, until you point it out to them, they don't know what it is. I mean, it's just this kind of slow growing tiny shrub that just has these small waxy green leaves that no one notices for most of the year. And then even when it blooms, it just gets these kind of creamy flowers.
Right.
And
sort of nondescript.
Totally nondescript. But once you point it out, people realize it's literally everywhere. But it's really interesting. The nectar, you can walk into an apiary and it smells like a dirty, if they've been on it a lot, it's like a dirty locker room. It's like a sweat sock smell,
How buckwheat honey can sometimes smell.
Yeah, but it doesn't taste bad. I mean, it crystallizes really quickly though. Like, I mean, you literally have to pull the honey and extract it like immediately. And it'll be crystallized within a week or two in the jar.
Okay. So it must have a really high glucose content
Yeah.
that it's crystallizing that fast.
Yeah.
So, and do the bees winter on that as well? Do you leave it to the bees or you try to pull it off?
I don't mind leaving it to the bees because I know it can cause problems with dysentery with bees but here, because it's such a mild winter, they can go on cleansing flights pretty much any day. So don't really worry about it.
Okay.
And there's enough
the ash
diversity.
content.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say it's the ash content in some of those honeys that are really difficult for bees if they're having to stay in a winter cluster for long times.
Yeah, and our bees, they have brood year round. They get into smaller clusters, but in some areas the eucalyptus is blooming as early as December. And so as long as it's warm enough, which most days it is, I can usually count the number of days that we get a frost on one hand. They're out.
If you guys are having brood, if you're having brood year round, it must make your varroa management very difficult.
Yes and no. Although we can get away with, we've really been trying to focus on local stock, and there's been, historically speaking, Marin really had a focus on treatment-free beekeeping. So I think that's helped with it. It's rare for us to treat a colony more than once in a season for varroa.
Okay. I used to be able to get away with treating only once a year. And then as the beekeeping hobby exploded, it became more and more difficult because I was finding very high numbers in late summer with, I think, colonies crashing and then my bees bringing mites in, which is always a shame. Yeah,
or those colonies taking their pests and diseases on the road. We definitely have observed that more and more. So we've had the same problem, which is why I said, historically Marin has been more treatment-free. And anecdotally, when varroa mite arrived, it totally decimated the beekeepers who here, there's very few professional beekeepers. It's mostly backyard beekeepers. We're not a big honey producing area, and agriculture here is cattle. So, there's really not the need for pollination services. So anecdotally, varroa swept in, decimated beekeepers, but they were primarily treatment-free, let the strong build back. And when we got into beekeeping and I was asking longtime beekeepers, when I was trying to figure out what killed our first colony, and I asked about mites, they said, that's really not a problem here anymore. So that's very anecdotal, but then like you said, with the explosion of beekeepers, I know our local Marin County beekeepers in 2005, there were 25 members and now there's over 350. And just from the clients that I have that are active in the group and not active in the group, I would estimate we probably have about 2,000 beekeepers here now.
Wow, that's quite an increase.
Yeah, so I really couldn't in good conscience keep pushing that just sole treatment free because as you said, the problem with pests and diseases migrating and just the density of bees. So we really encourage people to practice IPM and use oxalic or formic. And
I think that works really well. It's very, very difficult, I think, for people to realize that they're not beekeeping in isolation and that their bees are interacting with the bees of other colonies in the neighborhood and also the native bees.
Right.
And so especially since a lot of people who get into beekeeping tend to be very entrepreneurial and sort of independent, and they like to do things their own way. And I always try to advocate for community beekeeping, that you have an awareness of the other people keeping bees in your area, and you can coordinate that way and sort of self-monitor and interact and exchange information.
Yeah. I'm kind of a downer in my beginner beekeeping classes because I spend the first half hour giving people all the reasons that they shouldn't be beekeepers, including the fact that, if you're not willing to put the time in and take care of your bees, you're going to impact other beekeepers. So maybe you need to find another way, to interact with bees. Yeah.
I think that's really wise, because I think a lot of people they get into beekeeping to try and save the bees, but then they either don't have the time, or they just have lots of other obligations. It can be quite difficult. There's definitely a big time commitment if you want to do it well.
Yeah, I always tell people you're not helping save the bees by keeping a honeybee colony. There's plenty of those.
Yeah.
You'd help the bees by planting more forage for bees, and help support the native bees.
I love the message.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm kind of a downer, and I joke about that. I was like, well, now, okay, so that's a bummer. Yeah. Hey, you want to talk about some cool things with bees? Because they're pretty cool,
So yeah, I think to introduce people with a realistic approach is very important. So I think that's an important lesson.
Don't you think that's kind of a changing message with bee groups, though, and with teaching? It's gone from in the last decade, like, get a hive, it'll be great, to, well, you gotta, there's a lot of beekeepers, and we're all. Have you found that? I mean, it seems like when I
have. I mean, I've definitely been one of the people who switched as well, and I think it's in part beekeeping just wasn't that popular. But in the last 10 years, I would say, I mean, I have no idea what the estimates are. They're probably very far off. And I don't know what the turnover rate is, but I was hearing from some of the catalog companies that a lot of people who get in don't stay in it for more than a year. And so, yes, there are a lot of people jumping into it. And I think it's smart on behalf of the short courses and the classes to try and emphasize that if you want to do this, it does take time and dedication to do it right. So.
Yeah, my message always is that it's tough to be a bee these days, which means it's really tough to be a beekeeper. So,
I like that.
Yeah.
That's a good phrase.
Yeah. So, and I give people statistics. I mean, here in our county, at least 30% of the bees are lost every year after those devastating fires in 2018 that were just so toxic from Paradise, even though it's not close to us. Oh my gosh, that smoke was so terrible. I don't have any scientific evidence for this, but it was interesting. We did have an uptick in colony losses after the fall 2017 fires up in Santa Rosa and Napa that are just 40 miles north of us. However, in 2018, it was 70% losses. And without changing any of our own management for our bees or our clients' bees, 70% up from 25 to 30% on average. And I think
that's a huge spike.
A huge spike. And the only thing that made any sense to me, the only real difference that year was that terribly toxic smoke coming from structural fires.
Okay. Yeah, there's just a new article that came out in the Smithsonian where they look at the lead residues that show up in beehives after the Notre Dame fire.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and what they're finding is that they're finding it in the ones that are downwind and not upwind of the fire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so I know that you had mentioned in an email to me the forest fires that are going on right now and how those impact the bees. And I'm actually slightly less concerned about the forest fires as if they stay away from the urban areas and the structures. It's not fun breathing this smoke right now, and it's dense. It's very dense. Yeah. That the fires, the Woodward fire that's burning in Point Reyes, that's a 35-minute drive from us. So it's really close. This morning, we usually have a beautiful view of Mount Tamalpais out of our window. Could hardly, the ridge that's less than a mile from our house, we could hardly see, much less Mount Tamalpais. So it's really dense. But like I said, it just doesn't seem to be as toxic as those structural fires that have, like you said, I mean, you've got all those electronics that burn, you've got whatever chemicals, paints, things that are in people's garages. And when you multiply that out on the scale of, the Santa Rosa fires and the Paradise fires, that's some pretty nasty stuff.
No, it is. And often you don't know what's going up in smoke. So the impacts can be long lasting.
Yeah.
And you've been working with the Fire Safety Commission. Can you go a bit into how and why and what you've been up to?
Well, some of that went back to the Bee Audacious conference, and this issue about habitat being important. And, of course, like with these devastating fires that have happened, and Marin County's got a very high fuel load, around Mount Tamalpais, because as people have built into these areas where they no longer let natural fires, which fires have been part of the California landscape forever, and you can look at a lot of the other Mediterranean climates in Australia and South Africa, which are also characterized by, periods of high winds and fires that kind of clean things out. So over the last century or so, where we've tried to suppress fires, we've built a lot of fuel up, and now people are living in these areas. So following the devastation of the last few fire seasons, the fire communities that are very well staffed and funded have been very aggressive in really pushing for more defensible space. So amidst all this, I picked up the paper one day, or actually I saw it online. I guess I didn't pick it up. I clicked on it. Yeah. And the headline was that our San Rafael City Council had voted 4-1 to move forward with these working on draft regulations for new vegetation management. And I figured it was time for me to spend a little time to read this 50-something page document. And I read it and I just cried. I literally cried. I didn't sleep for several nights because just looking at our yard and thinking about what they were asking, what that would do for erosion, what it would do, like the rapid removal of trees, and what it would do for understory plants. I mean, we wouldn't have a salamander alive in our yard if we had done what they wanted us to do. And yeah, it was really, so we actually added that as one of the topics of conversation at the regional conference. And I really reached out to people in the fire community to try to get them involved. Right. Trying to see how can we make fire prevention compatible with protection of biodiversity, because, these things aren't happening in a vacuum. They're both very important. And because the fire community is so well staffed and well funded, and frankly, they've got a lot of research. I mean, they've got a lot more history than the pollinator community, right? I mean,
most definitely.
We've been dealing with fires for a lot longer than we've been dealing with the loss of biodiversity, which has really been something that's happened after World War II with the increasing use of chemicals and fertilizers, pesticides.
Right.
And so,
oh wow,
yeah, we started this conversation. And I really didn't know at the time, like there really wasn't anyone I thought that was organizing for this. And I started reaching out to beekeepers and saying, we can't let this happen. Who's interested? And someone forwarded one of my emails to the president of the Marine Conservation League. And I was invited to a group they had just formed, the Fire and Environment Working Group, where they had other people concerned with this, including the California Native Plant Society.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so they started organizing people to tackle this issue, and I have to say, I was really impressed. Our head of the local Fire Safe Marin, I had been emailing him earlier. We'd never met in person, and he actually said to me a couple times, "I think you're being very adversarial." And I was like, "I'm not trying to be adversarial. Obviously, I'm concerned about. I live in an old wooden house. Fire prevention is important to me, but I'm also concerned about biodiversity. And I'm concerned about the recommendations. We were talking about Bacchus early, which is such an important native plant. Right. That was on their list of plants they wanted people to remove. Oh, and on their list of acceptable plants were plants that are not from this climate, don't provide any habitat. Don't tell someone to rip out an ecologically important plant and instead plant Asian azaleas. That just made no sense. That's
crazy.
Yeah. I mean, plants that are evolved with a totally different soil type take a lot of resources. It's like we need a more nuanced message. I mean, if you're telling people to take out important plants, give them other important plants to replace them with, not crap, basically. So yeah, it's kind of evolved over the last year or so. The fire department has really gotten behind this. I just have so much respect for our county fire chief and the fire people. The voters actually ended up passing a Measure C that's going to tax all properties and raise about $20 million a year to go for fire prevention, like doing better evacuation routes, clearing vegetation. But as part of so they've created this new Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. But a portion of this is a group called the ESP, Ecologically Sound Practices, which they've got about 70 experts involved. People that are concerned about carbon sequestration, soil, California Native Plant Society, pollinators, and to help advise them so that in whatever regulations they're making or how they're doing their work, that it's not going to have unintended consequences.
Oh, fascinating.
And yeah, and it's really exciting. Our Marin County fire chief said that in his conversations with other fire chiefs around the state, we're the only county working on this. So I'm really hoping we can do this right. And
then others follow suit.
Yeah, but it's really exciting. Like, they let me speak to the new class of fire inspectors this year about some of these issues, of preservation of biodiversity and how some of the things that they're recommending to people, like how do we find the middle ground? They want people to clear brush and debris, but that's really important for pollinators, obviously.
Right. Well, and I'm sure there must be plant lists that are native, ecologically relevant, and act as fire retardants. I mean, as you said, it's a Mediterranean climate, and so a lot of those plants are highly adapted, where some burn, but also some need fires to regenerate and rebloom.
Well, what's really exciting is they're actually kind of moving away from this model of a good or bad list. I mean, well, they still have some of the bad actors because they're just such bad actors, like bamboo, juniper, that build up so much woody debris.
Okay.
But they're moving more towards, rather than a good list, they're moving more towards, they're partnering with our local master gardeners, which is part of the UC Cooperative Extension, to recommend proper maintenance, and moving towards a message of all plants burn. It's how you maintain them. So
right.
Irrigating them, pruning out the dead wood. And they've, kind of made a concession with the backrest where they're saying, we don't want it within 30 feet of structures because it has a tendency to build up dead woody material. But beyond that, like within 100 feet of your home, try to clean out the dead wood. Otherwise keep it because it's so important. And that's a huge shift in the messaging, which is very exciting to me.
Well, congratulations. I'm glad the efforts are paying off. It's always exciting.
Well, there's a lot more work we need to do, and this ESP group just got started. We've only had 2 meetings, but what we're working towards is figuring out how we can support the fire people with messaging, and for like recommendations. Plant this, not this. What you do if they're asking you to remove something on a hillside, which there are plenty in Marin County. How do you reduce the concerns for erosion? So we're trying to work with them to create the educational materials they need, because they're experts in fire, not experts in plants, and they don't want to be experts in plants and some of these other issues. That's not what their focus is.
Right.
So, yeah. So I think it's really exciting to see this collaboration as a community coming to try to address the many problems that are coming with the changing climate.
Fascinating. I wish you much success with it.
Hello, beekeepers. Your honeybees face a lot of challenges out there. Unbalanced food sources from monoculture crops, holding yards, drought, food shortages, antibiotics, pesticides, and pathogens like chalk brood. To overcome these challenges, your bees need the multiple bacteria that are in all nectars, pollens, and the environment. These bacteria aid honeybees' digestion and improve your honeybees' response and resilience to pesticides. Now you can help improve your honey colony health with a quick, easy, and safe-to-use product. Strong Microbial's Super DFM Honeybee uses naturally occurring bacteria to restore the healthy gut biome of your honeybees. Check them out today at www.strongmicrobials.com.
And you're used to collaborating with people. You helped organize the Bee Audacious conference. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that came to be?
Well, you know how it came to be? It came to be because Kirk Webster wanted to eat a pineapple where it was grown. Yeah, that's how it actually all started. Kirk has been a mentor, and gosh, we just have so much respect for him and everything he's done for the beekeeping community, and really like for pushing the ideas of sustainability forward. And he did mention to Gary, my husband and I, one time, that he really wanted someday to eat a pineapple where it was grown.
Okay.
And so Gary and I, who used to be very avid scuba divers and spent a lot of time on islands where pineapples were grown, really wanted to help him make that a reality.
Okay.
So we have a client who has an organic farm in Maui, and we actually installed some of his queens in her one of her apiaries, and told her about Kirk and this dream, and told her that we were wanted to get him to Fiji because we thought he'd really like the Fijian people as well. And she said, "You don't need to go to Fiji. I've got this farm in Maui. Why don't you come to Maui?" And it took a few years, and finally she told me, she said, "Well, I keep inviting him, but how about what if we organize a conference? Because I bet he'd come if you guys came." And so we did that. Organized a bee conference in Maui. And right around that same time is when Mark Winston's editorial on bee culture came out, where he was talking about, all the problems and the need for audacious thinking. And his recommendation that, for all you conference planners, how about you have a workshop at your next conference, Audacious Visions for the Future of Bees and Beekeeping. And I had been in touch with Mark at that time because he was coming down to Marin. His book, Time Lessons from the Hive, had just come out. And I said, "Well, hey, Mark, why just a session? Why not a whole conference?" Right. So it turned out that Hawaii was not the right place to do it and was not the right timing. But we decided to move forward with it. And I said, "Well, if Tom Seeley and Marla Spivak are willing to sign on and help with it, then I'll do whatever it takes to put it together, because I think it's a great idea." And they were, indeed they were. Yeah.
Wow. That's quite the collection. I was at that same weekend that was going on. There was another bee conference happening at Arizona State for Rob Page.
It was more of a bee party, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was definitely a bit of a bee party. And so I think some people were coming there and then headed back to the other one, and it was an interesting group. So
yeah. Yeah, it was too bad those ended up at the same timing, but it was what it was.
And what were some of the resolutions or things that came out of the Bee Audacious conference?
Well, anyone who's interested, Mark wrote up an 84-page report to wrap all that up, and we had a panel discussion of the leaders that you can see online if you go to beeaudacious.com. But it was really encouraging to have people who don't usually sit down or go to the same conferences sit down and find common ground, where they don't. It was pretty uplifting, I think, for everyone involved to have such positive energy. And, one of the big things, especially for me, the key takeaway was habitat. I mean, that was something that everyone could agree upon, is the importance of habitat. How can we also, related to that, decrease pesticide use? How can we form more collaborations across with people that, kind of unconventional collaborations? And actually, right. I think the fire department is one of those,
I would fully concur. It's the reason I launched 2 Million Blossoms as well, is I wanted to create more dialogue, because the news media was starting to pit beekeepers against native bee enthusiasts, and you kept seeing this growing divide. And as you say, for most of us, what we want is more habitat, more nectar, more pollen for everything out there. And so that was one of the driving forces.
Yeah. And, you say that about the, bees, native bees versus honeybees. I see that honeybees as really being a gateway to native bees for people. Yeah. I mean, that's really what I've seen. And I see it in my clients, and I see it in myself. I mean, first of all, it gets people closer to, what's directly around them and how they influence that. And they start paying attention to how little changes make a big difference in their colony. And right. They start thinking about, looking at what plants are around them and what's really supporting habitat. I mean, I think most of our urban areas are just a total green wasteland. I mean, we have this Victorian principle still of selecting plants, like what we can have, not what we should have, and right. For example, I mean, we've got this really not fussy. I mean, pomegranates aren't really fussy. It's really beautiful, orange, white, double petaled pomegranate that's about 120 years old on our property. It has never produced a fruit. It will never produce a fruit. It has to be, it has to be. If it weren't for humans, it would never propagate, right? And we do this a lot. I mean, like Manuka. Most people know about Manuka honey. In our area, what most people don't realize is you can go down to Home Depot and buy it, Leptospermum scoparium. It's very common, but the ones that are common are these really highly bred cultivars that the bees can't access.
Really don't produce anything. Yeah.
They don't produce anything. So, I mean, if you have, and one of our neighbors, one of them has like a big hedge of one of these fussy cultivars, and one of them has a straight species, and you'll see bees all over the straight species. You don't see them on the other one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it makes people really start to look at that. And then when they start to look at the plants, and then when you're watching the plants, then they start seeing native bees and start noticing other insects and things. So, I've heard that criticism from some people. In fact, I got a little, I got some somewhat harsh questioning from people from the Native Plant Society locally at an event, about my thoughts on that, bringing in these non-native honeybees. And it's a gateway. It's a gateway.
I agree. I always call honeybees the gateway bug. They are really a drug that gets you very much in tune with the whole environment and ecosystem services. And it's definitely how I became interested in the huge diversity we have of pollinators.
Yeah.
But it's a learning curve, and I think in many ways, because people have the association with honey and then they get to have the hands-on management, it gives them almost a slightly possessive quality where they then want to take care of it. And that taking care then expands to much broader other pollinators. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, it really does. And it starts expanding, like you see, especially as beekeeping has exploded, it expands into neighbors. It just kind of seeps out, these ideas about using less pesticides and what you're planting. I mean, I know like our neighbor, not the beekeeper, but the one on the other side has talked to us about what plants we recommend for our bees, because he wants to take care of them. I had a client who he had just moved to this area, and he said, "What do I need to talk to my?" He bought a house that had bees that the homeowner wasn't moving, and one of his first questions to me was, "What do I need to talk to my neighbors about regarding pesticides and chemical use to protect my bees?" Which was fascinating to me, and I have to think. I mean, you hear about all these terrible things about bee populations, especially native bees, declining. I feel like in Marin, at least anecdotally, we're doing better. And I have to question if that's because of this 10 years of people starting to change their plant preferences. I mean, I'm certainly seeing changes in what the nurseries are offering, more native plants, to match what demand is. And this year, I mean, we haven't seen bumblebees in our yard for, 10 years. And we started seeing bumblebees, and so many more bumblebees around the county. And in fact, even on our swarm reporting listserv for the Marin County beekeepers, there were somewhere between, 12 and 15 bumblebee nests reported, where I can't remember seeing more than one or two in the past.
Okay.
So,
well, that's very, very encouraging. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, we need to plant more, and we need to do it faster. I mean, I before bees, I was a horticulturalist and an arborist, and I look very critically when I drive around at what is on people's property and how much inputs it takes and how much outputs. And we're just way too high on the inputs, low on the outputs, and we really got to flip that. There's just too many people on this planet.
This is definitely true, and I think a lot of people always assume that planting something pollinator friendly will end up being more work. But I think if you design it well and think your choices out, it's actually a lot less maintenance.
Yeah, especially with the native plants, because this is, your native plants are what's accustomed to your soil, to your water system. Yeah, I mean, they're just a lot easier to get established.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me. The one last question that I always tend to ask people is, if you had to represent yourself online as a pollinator avatar, what pollinator would you choose?
That's a really tough question. I think I'd be a flower and not a pollinator. Yeah. I think my avatar would be a flower. Yeah.
Any specific flower?
Well, being here a big favorite here in Marin is the Ceanothus, really important to our honeybees and the native bees. Beautiful blue, and one of the first to emerge late in the winter.
Very, very awesome. I will have to look that one up. Is there anything else that you wanted to add for our listeners that I didn't ask you?
I don't think so. But thank you so much for the time. And again, thank you so much for all your work on the magazine.
Oh, thank you. It's a total blast. And I do hope you'll write for us at some point.
Oh, I will. Don't worry. Yeah.
All right. Enjoy your day.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks, Kirsten. That was really good. Bonnie had some great points to bring out.
Yeah, she's fascinating. I really enjoyed talking with her.
I got to believe that working with the California native plant people must be interesting, because she's advocating using some non-native plants because they're not as flammable as some of the native plants that the native plant people are talking about. So it'll be interesting to see how that gets solved and resolved, if it does.
Yeah, it's always difficult when you have multiple interests.
Yes. The one phrase that she said is probably settles it all. What they're looking for is no unintended consequences. That's a big goal, and I hope she's able to pull it off.
She seems to be working very closely with everybody. So. All
right. Well, thanks for bringing us that interview, Kirsten. And who do you have coming up next?
Next, I'm going to be speaking with Steve Rogenstein from the Bee Ambassadors. So he started the Honey Festival in Barcelona, is now active in Berlin. He's originally from New York, and is very much into all things bee and honey.
Very good. Look forward to hearing that. And that'll be in a couple weeks.
Yep.
All right. Well, as we wrap up the show, want to hope that all the beekeepers, especially those in the West and around the country, be careful with your smokers and how you light them, and dump your ashes. And you don't want to be that beekeeper on the news who started a wildfire.
Yeah.
It's really dangerous out there.
A metal trash can is always a great thing to have in a truck, or one of the large ammo boxes to hold your smoker. Those are both excellent for making sure all of your hot smoker material stays with you and doesn't go drifting somewhere.
Well, that about wraps it up for this podcast. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts wherever you download and stream the show. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. Even better, write a review and let us know what you like. As always, we thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their continued support of Beekeeping Today podcast. We want to thank Kirsten's episode sponsor, Better Bee. Check them out at www.betterbee.com. We want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. We want to thank Strong Microbials for becoming the latest supporter of the podcast. Check out their probiotic line at www.strongmicrobials.com. And finally, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions and comments at questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else, Kirsten, Kim?
I think that about wraps it up, Jeff. It was fun listening to Bonnie today. I'm going to be interested in seeing where that goes.
Good luck getting your hives ready for winter.